I'm Jennifer Martinez, 29 years old, and 3 weeks after my husband died in a car accident, his mother walked into my home and said, "Pack your bags. The child belongs with his real family now. You're just the incubator who carried him." She had no idea that my husband had left me something that would change everything. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws who tried to take your children, please let me know where you're watching from. This is the story of how I fought the most powerful family in our town to keep my son, and how my late husband's final gift gave me the strength to win a battle I never thought I could survive. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and I want to tell you about the worst and most transformative year of my life. A year that started with the deepest love I'd ever known and ended with a legal victory that no one saw coming. It all began 3 years ago when I met David Williams at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook, Connecticut. I was 26, working as a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, and he was 31, a successful architect who had just moved back to his hometown to help expand his family's construction business. David was different from any man I had ever met, kind, thoughtful, and completely unimpressed by his family's wealth and social status. The Williams family had been prominent in Millbrook for 3 generations. They owned the largest construction company in the county, sat on every important board, and their name was on half the buildings in town. But David never acted entitled or superior. He was passionate about sustainable architecture, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and treated everyone with genuine respect regardless of their background. I, on the other hand, came from much humbler beginnings. My parents, Rosa and Miguel Martinez, had immigrated from El Salvador when I was 5 years old. My father worked construction, ironically sometimes for Williams Construction, and my mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. I had worked my way through nursing school with scholarships, student loans, and weekend jobs. When David and I started dating, I was nervous about the class differences between our families. But David made it clear from the beginning that my background didn't matter to him at all. "Jennifer," he told me on our 3rd date, "I've met plenty of people with money who have no character, and I've met people with no money who are rich in everything that actually matters. You're in the second category." His family, however, was a different story. David's mother, Patricia Williams, was a 58-year-old woman who had married into the Williams family and had spent 30 years establishing herself as the unofficial queen of Millbrook society. She was on the board of the country club, chaired the annual charity gala, and seemed to believe that her family's success gave her the right to judge everyone else's worthiness. David's father, Robert Williams, was more reserved but equally committed to maintaining the family's social status. He was a traditionalist who believed strongly in appropriate matches and maintaining standards. From the moment David introduced me to his parents, Patricia made her disapproval clear. She was never openly rude, but her condescension was constant and cutting. "Oh, nursing," she said when David told her about my career. "How practical. I suppose someone has to do those jobs." When she learned about my parents' occupations, her smile became even more forced. "How interesting. Miguel works construction, you said? Perhaps Robert knows him." The implication was clear. My father was labor, their family was management, and I was reaching above my station by dating their son. David was furious when he noticed his mother's behavior. After one particularly uncomfortable family dinner, he confronted her directly. "Mom, I need you to understand something. Jennifer is the most incredible woman I've ever met. She's intelligent, compassionate, and hardworking. If you can't treat her with respect, you won't be seeing much of me." Patricia's response was icy. "David, dear, I'm simply concerned about your future. Marriage is about more than romance. It's about compatibility, shared values, and, well, shared backgrounds. You come from different worlds." "Our worlds aren't different," David replied firmly. "We both believe in kindness, honesty, and working hard for what we want. Those are the values that matter." Despite his family's disapproval, David and I grew closer. He proposed after 18 months of dating during a weekend trip to Vermont. It was perfect. Just the 2 of us, a beautiful sunset, and a ring that was meaningful rather than ostentatious. When we announced our engagement, Patricia's reaction was predictably cold. "Well," she said after a long pause, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Have you discussed the prenuptial agreement?" David looked shocked. "Mom, we're not having a prenuptial agreement. I trust Jennifer completely." "David," his father interjected, "you need to be practical about protecting family assets." The only asset I care about protecting is my relationship with Jennifer, David said firmly, and that doesn't require a legal document. The conversation escalated from there, with Patricia making increasingly pointed comments about gold diggers and people who target successful families. David finally stood up and announced that we were leaving. In the car afterward, he was angrier than I had ever seen him. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer. I can't believe they would talk to you like that." "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't really. "They're just protective of you." "No," David said firmly, "they're being elitist and cruel, and it's not okay." That night, David made a decision that would later prove to be incredibly important. He called his lawyer and updated his will, making me his sole beneficiary and establishing a trust for any future children we might have. He also wrote a detailed letter explaining his wishes regarding our family and his parents' role in our lives. "I want to make sure you and our future children are protected if anything ever happens to me," he explained. "I don't trust my parents to do the right thing." I thought he was being overly cautious. I couldn't imagine that his parents would ever try to harm me or our children, regardless of their disapproval of our marriage. I was wrong. We were married 6 months later in a beautiful but modest ceremony. Patricia insisted on helping with the planning, which mostly meant criticizing my choices and suggesting improvements that would cost thousands of dollars we didn't want to spend. "Don't you think the flowers are a bit simple?" she asked during one planning session. "The Williams family is known for elegant events." "I think they're perfect," David said before I could respond. "Jennifer has excellent taste, and this is our wedding, not a Williams family production." The wedding day itself was wonderful, despite Patricia's constant interference. David and I were surrounded by people who loved and supported us. My family, our friends, and even some of David's relatives who were genuinely happy for us. Patricia spent the reception making comments about the intimate size of the wedding and the charming simplicity of the decorations. Her tone made it clear that these were not compliments. But David and I didn't care. We were married, we were happy, and we were ready to build our life together. The first year of our marriage was blissful. We bought a modest house in a neighborhood Patricia considered up and coming, her polite way of saying not prestigious enough. And I continued working at the hospital while David built his architecture practice. Patricia's interference was constant but manageable. She would drop by unannounced, rearrange our furniture when we weren't looking, and make suggestions about improving our home and lifestyle. "This living room has such potential," she would say. "With the right decorator and a proper budget, it could really be something special." David learned to manage her visits by setting firm boundaries. "Mom, you need to call before coming over. This is our home, and we need our privacy." "I'm just trying to help," she would protest. "I have experience with these things." "We appreciate the thought," David would reply diplomatically, "but we're happy with our choices." When I became pregnant during our second year of marriage, Patricia's behavior became even more intrusive. She had opinions about everything: my doctor, my hospital, my birth plan, even the nursery colors. "I really think you should consider Dr. Hartwell," she said during one visit. "He's the best obstetrician in the county. Much more appropriate for a Williams family baby." "My doctor is excellent," I replied calmly. "I trust her completely." "Well, I suppose you know best," Patricia said in a tone that clearly indicated she thought the opposite. The interference escalated when she started buying baby items without consulting us: expensive cribs, designer clothes, and toys that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "Mom," David said after she arrived with the third high-end stroller, "we appreciate your generosity, but we want to choose our own baby items." "I'm just ensuring my grandchild has the best," Patricia replied. "Surely you don't object to that." "We object to decisions being made without our input," I said firmly. "This is our baby, and we want to make our own choices." Patricia's expression turned cold. "Jennifer, dear, I've been raising children since before you were born. I think I know what's best for a Williams family baby." The phrase, "Williams family baby," bothered me more than I wanted to admit. She never referred to the baby as our grandchild or Jennifer and David's baby. Always Williams family baby, as if my role was purely biological. When Tommy was born, he was perfect. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure joy with David's dark hair and my brown eyes. David cried when he held him for the first time, and I knew our son was going to be surrounded by love. Patricia's reaction to Tommy's birth was complicated. She was clearly thrilled to have a grandchild, but she immediately began treating me like an inadequate caretaker rather than his mother. "Are you sure you're feeding him enough?" she would ask during visits. "He seems small." "The pediatrician says he's perfect," I would reply. Well, doctors don't always know everything. A grandmother's instincts are often more reliable. She would hold Tommy for hours during visits, making comments about proper child-rearing techniques and suggesting improvements to our parenting. "In my day, we didn't coddle babies like this," she would say when I picked up Tommy after he cried. "Sometimes they need to learn independence." David tried to run interference, but Patricia was relentless. She seemed to view Tommy as her do-over grandchild, an opportunity to implement all the parenting theories she felt she hadn't been able to use with David. The real problems began when Tommy was about 6 months old. Patricia started making comments about my inexperience and suggesting that Tommy would benefit from more structured caregiving. "Jennifer, dear," she said during one visit, "have you considered that Tommy might do better with a more experienced caregiver during the day? I know some excellent nannies from the best families." "I'm his mother," I replied firmly. "He doesn't need a nanny." "Of course you're his mother," Patricia said in a condescending tone, "but motherhood is more than biology. It requires knowledge, experience, and proper resources." David was furious when I told him about these conversations. "Mom," he said during our next family dinner, "you need to stop undermining Jennifer. She's an excellent mother, and your comments are inappropriate." "I'm simply concerned about my grandchild's welfare," Patricia replied defensively. "Tommy's welfare is perfect," David said firmly. "He's healthy, happy, and loved, that's all that matters." But Patricia's behavior continued to escalate. She started showing up at the house when she knew David was at work, offering unsolicited advice about everything from feeding schedules to sleep training. One afternoon, when Tommy was about 10 months old, I came home from a quick grocery store run to find Patricia in my kitchen, reorganizing my baby supplies. "Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on Tommy," she said without looking up from the cabinet she was rearranging. "Your organization system is quite confusing. I'm just making it more efficient." "Please don't rearrange my things," I said firmly, "and next time, please call before coming over." Patricia turned to face me with an expression of cold displeasure. "Jennifer, I think we need to have an honest conversation about Tommy's care. I'm concerned that you're not providing the level of attention and structure he needs." "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting that perhaps Tommy would benefit from spending more time with experienced caregivers. I could arrange for him to stay with us several days a week, just to ensure he gets proper attention." The audacity of her suggestion left me speechless. "Patricia, Tommy is my son. He doesn't need to stay with you. He needs to be with his parents. David works long hours," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "And you're still quite young. Raising a Williams family child requires certain standards." "I meet every standard that matters," I replied, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I love my son, I care for him well, and I don't need your approval or assistance." Patricia's mask of politeness finally slipped. "Love isn't enough, Jennifer. This child deserves more than what a girl from your background can provide." That evening, when David came home, I told him about the conversation. He was angrier than I had ever seen him. "That's it," he said. "I'm calling her right now." The phone call was explosive. I could hear Patricia's voice rising from across the room as David laid down firm boundaries about her behavior and her access to our family. "Mom," he said, his voice deadly calm, "if you ever again suggest that Jennifer is an inadequate mother or that Tommy would be better off away from his parents, you will not see him at all. Do you understand me?" After he hung up, David held me while I cried from frustration and hurt. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have stopped this sooner." "I just don't understand why she hates me so much," I said. "She doesn't hate you," David replied thoughtfully. "She's threatened by you. You represent everything she's not, genuine, unpretentious, and loved for who you are rather than what you have. And Tommy loves you unconditionally, which reminds her that love can't be bought or controlled. For several months after that confrontation, Patricia maintained her distance. She would visit occasionally, but her behavior was more restrained. I thought we had reached some kind of understanding. I was wrong again. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in March. David was driving home from a client meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit his car head-on. He was killed instantly. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. I was putting Tommy to bed when the hospital called to tell me that my husband, my best friend, the love of my life, was gone. The next few days passed in a blur of grief, funeral arrangements, and trying to comfort Tommy, who was too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, but old enough to sense that something terrible had happened. David's funeral was packed with people whose lives he had touched. Clients, co-workers, friends, and family members all came to pay their respects to a man who had died far too young. Throughout the service and the reception afterward, Patricia played the role of the grieving mother perfectly. She accepted condolences graciously, spoke eloquently about David's life and achievements, and appeared to be a pillar of strength for the family. But I noticed that she barely acknowledged my grief, or Tommy's confusion. She seemed to view herself as the primary mourner, with me as a supporting character in the tragedy of her loss. After the funeral, I retreated to my house with Tommy, trying to figure out how to rebuild our lives without David. The insurance money would help financially, but the emotional challenge of single motherhood while grieving seemed overwhelming. For the first 2 weeks, Patricia left us alone. I assumed she was dealing with her own grief and giving us space to begin healing. Then, 3 weeks after David's death, she appeared at my door. I was in my pajamas, having just put Tommy down for his afternoon nap, when the doorbell rang. Patricia stood on my porch, impeccably dressed, and wearing an expression I had never seen before. "Patricia," I said, surprised by her visit. "How are you doing?" "I'm managing," she replied curtly. "May I come in? We need to talk." I led her to the living room, offering coffee that she declined. She sat on the edge of my couch, looking around the room with an expression of distaste. "Jennifer," she began without preamble, "I've been thinking about Tommy's situation, and I believe it's time to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though something in her tone made me deeply uneasy. "Well," she said, smoothing her skirt, "you're very young. You have no family support system here. And frankly, you lack the resources to provide Tommy with the life he deserves as a Williams." I stared at her, not quite comprehending what she was suggesting. "I think," she continued, "that Tommy would be much better off living with Robert and me. We have the financial resources, the social connections, and the experience to raise him properly." "Patricia," I said slowly, "Tommy is my son. He's not going anywhere." She smiled, but it was cold and predatory. "Jennifer, dear, I think you misunderstand your position here. David is gone, and with him your only connection to the Williams family. Tommy is a Williams. You're just the woman who carried him." The callousness of her words hit me like a physical blow. "Just the woman who carried him? I'm his mother." "Biologically, yes," Patricia replied dismissively. "But what can you really offer him? You're a nurse from a working-class family. We can give him the best schools, the right connections, the proper upbringing for someone of his background." I stood up, my hands shaking with anger and shock. "Get out of my house." Patricia remained seated, completely unfazed by my reaction. "Jennifer, I understand you're emotional, but you need to think rationally about what's best for Tommy. I'm not trying to cut you out completely. You could have visitation, of course, but he belongs with his real family now." "I am his real family," I shouted, no longer caring if I woke Tommy from his nap. "I'm his mother. I carried him for 9 months. I gave birth to him. I've cared for him every day of his life." "Yes," Patricia said, standing up and moving toward the door. "You were the incubator, and we're grateful for that. But now it's time for the adults to take over. She paused at the door and turned back to me with a smile that was pure malice. I'll give you a few days to think about this rationally. But Jennifer, understand that this is going to happen one way or another. You can cooperate and maintain some role in Tommy's life, or you can fight us and lose everything. We have resources you can't imagine, and you have nothing. After she left, I collapsed on my couch and cried harder than I had since David's death. Not just from grief, but from terror. Patricia Williams was one of the most powerful women in our town, married to one of the most successful businessmen in the county. They had money, influence, and social connections that could crush me. I was a 29-year-old widow with a modest house, a nurse's salary, and no family nearby to help me fight. But I was also Tommy's mother, and I would die before I let anyone take him away from me. That night, after Tommy was asleep, I called David's lawyer, Michael Chen. Michael had been David's friend since college and had handled all of our legal affairs. "Jennifer," he said when I explained what had happened, "I'm so sorry. Patricia's behavior is despicable, but unfortunately it's not illegal for her to ask for custody." "Can she actually get it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It would be difficult," Michael said carefully. "You're Tommy's biological mother, you're financially stable, and there's no evidence of neglect or abuse. But the Williams family has significant resources, and if they're determined to fight—" "Michael," I interrupted, "I need to know the truth. What are my chances?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, if they hire the best lawyers and are willing to spend whatever it takes, they could make your life very difficult. They might not win custody, but they could drain your resources and energy for years." The reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. I was about to face the most powerful family in town in a legal battle I couldn't afford to lose, but wasn't sure I could win. "However," Michael continued, "there is one thing in your favor. David updated his will 2 years ago, right after you got married. He was very specific about his wishes regarding Tommy's care." "What kind of wishes?" I asked. "I think you should come in tomorrow," Michael said. "There are some documents David left that you need to see." The next morning, I dropped Tommy off at daycare and went to Michael's office. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name, written in David's handwriting. "He gave this to me when he updated his will," Michael explained. "He said to give it to you if anything happened to him, and if his parents ever tried to interfere with your family." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and began to read David's letter. "My dearest Jennifer, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and I'm not there to protect you and Tommy from my parents' interference. I'm writing this because I know my mother well enough to predict that she will try to take Tommy away from you, and I want to make sure you have the tools to fight her. First, know that you are an incredible mother and wife, and Tommy is lucky to have you. Never let anyone make you doubt that. Second, I have established a trust fund for Tommy that my parents cannot access or control. The trust is worth $2.8 million and is to be used solely for his education, healthcare, and general welfare, as determined by you as his guardian. Third, and most importantly, I have written a detailed statement about my wishes for Tommy's care that is legally binding. I want him raised by you, in the environment we created together, with the values we share. I have specifically stated that my parents should have limited grandparent visitation rights only, and only if they treat you with respect. The trust documents and my statement are in the safe deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. Key is in the small jewelry box on my dresser. Jennifer, my parents have money and influence, but you have something more powerful. You are Tommy's mother, and I have made sure the law protects that bond. Fight for our son. You are stronger than you know. All my love, David."
I cried reading David's letter, but for the first time since his death, they were tears of relief rather than despair.
"Even in death, my husband was protecting our family."
Michael read the trust documents and David's statement, nodding approvingly. "This is ironclad," he said. "David was very thorough. Not only does this establish you as Tommy's sole guardian with complete decision-making authority, but it also makes it clear that any attempt by his parents to gain custody goes against his explicit wishes."
"But can they still try to fight it?" I asked.
"They can try," Michael replied, "but they won't win. And now that I know about the trust, I'm much more confident about our position. David didn't just leave you a letter. He left you the resources to fight them. Armed with David's documents and a renewed sense of determination, I waited for Patricia's next move.
It came 3 days later in the form of a legal document served to my home by a sheriff's deputy. Patricia and Robert Williams were filing for emergency custody of Tommy, claiming that I was emotionally unstable and financially unable to provide adequate care. Reading their petition made me physically ill. They claimed that I was neglecting Tommy's needs, that I was too distraught to function as a parent, and that, as his deceased father's family, they were better positioned to provide for him. They had hired Crawford, Barnes, and Associates, the most expensive law firm in the county, and they were clearly prepared to wage total war. But I was no longer the terrified widow they thought they were fighting. I called Michael immediately and scheduled an emergency meeting. The next morning, we filed our response to their petition, along with David's trust documents and his statement about Tommy's care. "Jennifer," Michael said as we left the courthouse, "you need to prepare yourself for this to get ugly. The Williams family is used to getting their way, and they're not going to give up easily." He was right. Over the next several weeks, Patricia and Robert's lawyers tried every tactic they could think of. They questioned my mental health, my financial stability, my parenting abilities, and even my immigration status. I was a U.S. citizen, having been naturalized when I was 12. They hired a private investigator to follow me, looking for any evidence of neglect or inappropriate behavior. They interviewed my neighbors, Tommy's daycare providers, and even my coworkers at the hospital, fishing for negative information. But for every attack they made, Michael and I had a response. David's trust documents proved that Tommy was financially secure. My work records showed that I was a dedicated professional with no history of instability. My neighbors and colleagues testified that I was a loving, capable mother. Most importantly, David's statement about his wishes for Tommy's care was unambiguous and legally binding. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the initial petition was filed. I sat in the courtroom with Michael, facing a team of 4 lawyers representing the Williams family. Patricia and Robert sat behind their legal team, both dressed impeccably and radiating confidence. Patricia caught my eye and smiled coldly, as if she had already won. Judge Rebecca Martinez, no relation to me despite the shared surname, reviewed the case documents before calling the hearing to order. "This is a petition for emergency custody," she began, "filed by Robert and Patricia Williams, seeking custody of their grandson, Thomas Williams Martinez, currently in the care of his mother, Jennifer Martinez." The Williams family's lead attorney, James Crawford, stood to present their case. He was exactly what you'd expect from the most expensive lawyer in town, silver-haired, well-dressed, and supremely confident. "Your Honor," Crawford began, "my clients are seeking custody of their grandson because they believe he is not receiving adequate care from his current guardian. Mrs. Martinez is a young widow with limited resources and no family support system. My clients can provide Thomas with financial security, educational opportunities, and the stable family environment he needs." Crawford presented a compelling case, emphasizing the Williams family's financial resources, their standing in the community, and their ability to provide Tommy with every advantage. But when Michael stood to present our defense, the entire dynamic of the hearing changed. "Your Honor," Michael said, "before we address the petitioner's claims, I'd like to present evidence of the deceased father's explicit wishes regarding his son's care." He handed copies of David's trust documents and statement to the judge and to Crawford's team. I watched Patricia's face as her lawyer read David's statement, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Judge Martinez read David's documents carefully, taking several minutes to review the trust details and his statement about Tawny's care. "Mr. Crawford," she said finally, "are your clients aware that the child's father specifically stated his wishes that the child remain in his mother's care, and that his parents should have only limited visitation rights?" Crawford looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Your Honor, circumstances have changed since that document was written. The father could not have anticipated his own death or the challenges that his wife would face as a single mother. The document," Judge Martinez replied dryly, was written specifically to address what should happen in the event of the father's death, and it explicitly states that the child should remain with his mother unless she is proven unfit. She turned to Michael. Mr. Chen, what evidence do you have regarding Mrs. Martinez's fitness as a parent? Michael presented testimonials from Tommy's pediatrician, his daycare providers, my supervisors at the hospital, and several neighbors. Every single person testified that I was a devoted, capable mother, and that Tommy was thriving in my care. He also presented the trust documents, showing that Tommy was financially secure and that I had complete authority over his care and education. Your Honor, Michael concluded, not only is there no evidence that Mrs. Martinez is an unfit parent, but there is overwhelming evidence that she is an excellent mother who is providing her son with exactly the kind of loving, stable home that his father wanted for him. Crawford tried to salvage his case by arguing that the Williams family could provide additional resources and opportunities, but Judge Martinez was clearly unimpressed. Mr. Crawford, she said, this court does not award custody based on who has the most money. Custody is awarded based on the best interests of the child, and in this case, the child's father has made his wishes abundantly clear. She paused, looking directly at Patricia and Robert Williams. Furthermore, I am troubled by the petitioner's characterization of Mrs. Martinez as merely a temporary guardian or biological mother. She is this child's legal mother and primary parent, and absent evidence of abuse or neglect which has not been presented, she has every right to raise her son as she sees fit. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The petition for emergency custody was denied. Tommy would remain with me, and the Williams family would be granted supervised visitation rights only, and only if they treated me with respect. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. I want to address something else, she continued, her voice stern. The court has reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, and I am deeply concerned about the harassment and intimidation tactics that appear to have been used against Mrs. Martinez. She looked directly at Crawford. Counselor, I hope you will advise your clients that any further attempts to undermine Mrs. Martinez's parenting or to harass her in any way will result in the complete termination of their visitation rights. Patricia's face had gone completely white. This was clearly not the outcome she had expected. As we left the courthouse, Michael put his hand on my shoulder. Jennifer, that was about as decisive a victory as we could have hoped for. Patricia and Robert's custody challenge is dead in the water. But I knew this wasn't over. The Williams family was not accustomed to losing, and Patricia's pride had been deeply wounded by the judge's public rebuke. I was right to be concerned. Over the next few months, Patricia tried different tactics. She would show up for her supervised visits with expensive gifts for Tommy, trying to win his affection through material means. She would make comments about how much better his life could be if he lived with her and Robert. During one visit, I overheard her telling 3-year-old Tommy, "Wouldn't you like to live in Grandma's big house with the swimming pool and all the toys?" I immediately ended the visit and called Michael. "She's trying to alienate Tommy from me," I told him. "Document everything," Michael advised. "If she continues this behavior, we can go back to court and request that her visitation rights be terminated." The visits became increasingly tense, with Patricia clearly resenting the supervised format and my authority over the arrangements. She would arrive late, complain about the location, we met at a neutral site, and make passive-aggressive comments about Tommy's clothes, toys, and general care. "This jacket is quite worn," she commented during one visit. "I could take Tommy shopping for some nicer clothes." "Tommy's clothes are fine," I replied firmly, "and if he needs new clothes, I'll buy them." Patricia's mask of politeness was slipping more with each visit. The woman who had once been subtle in her condescension was becoming openly hostile. The breaking point came 6 months after the custody hearing. I arrived at our usual meeting spot, a park pavilion, with Tommy for his scheduled visit with Patricia. She was already there, but instead of being alone as required by the supervision order, she had brought someone with her. "Jennifer," she said without preamble, "this is Dr. Sarah Blackwood. She's a child psychologist, and I've asked her to evaluate Tommy's emotional state." I stared at her in disbelief. "Patricia, you cannot bring unauthorized people to supervised visits, and you certainly cannot have Tommy evaluated by anyone without my permission. As his grandmother, I have a right to be concerned about his psychological welfare," Patricia replied coldly. "No," I said firmly, "you don't. Not without a court order." Dr. Blackwood, who looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation, spoke up. Mrs. Martinez, I apologize for any confusion. Mrs. Williams contacted me about concerns regarding Tommy's adjustment to his father's death, but I cannot evaluate him without your consent. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood, I said politely. Tommy is receiving excellent care, including regular checkups with his pediatrician. If I felt he needed psychological evaluation, I would arrange it myself. Patricia's face flushed with anger. Jennifer, you are being unreasonable. I am simply trying to ensure that my grandson receives the best possible care. No, I replied, my patience finally exhausted. You are trying to undermine my authority as his mother. This visit is over. I took Tommy's hand and started walking toward my car. Patricia followed us, her voice rising. You cannot keep doing this, she shouted. You cannot cut me off from my grandson. I turned around to face her, making sure Tommy was safely behind me. Patricia, you have visitation rights as long as you follow the court's rules. Today you violated those rules by bringing an unauthorized person and attempting to have Tommy evaluated without my permission. I will be reporting this to my lawyer. Your lawyer? Patricia laughed bitterly. Jennifer, you seem to have forgotten your place. You are a nurse from a working-class family. I am Patricia Williams. My family built this town. You cannot threaten me. It was the first time she had dropped all pretense of civility, and her words revealed the depth of her contempt for me. Mrs. Williams, I said calmly, my place is as Tommy's mother, and that's a place no one can take from me. As I drove away, I could see Patricia in my rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot with her hands clenched into fists, her carefully controlled facade completely shattered. That evening, I called Michael and reported what had happened. She's becoming desperate, he observed. The fact that she tried to bring in a psychologist without authorization shows that she's running out of legal options. What should I do? I asked. Document everything that happened today and I'll file a motion to modify the visitation order. Given her repeated violations and attempts to undermine your authority, I think we can make a strong case for supervised visits in a more controlled environment, or possibly even termination of visitation rights altogether. 2 days later, I received another legal document that made my blood run cold. Patricia and Robert were filing a new petition, this time claiming that I was preventing them from having a meaningful relationship with their grandson and requesting the court to award them unsupervised visitation and partial custody. But this petition was different from their first attempt. This time, they had hired a new lawyer, someone even more expensive and aggressive than Crawford. They were also presenting new evidence of my supposed unfitness as a parent. According to their petition, I was emotionally unstable due to grief, financially irresponsible based on my housing choices, and alienating Tommy from his father's family. They had somehow obtained photographs of me crying in my car after a particularly difficult day, which they were presenting as evidence of my emotional instability. They had also hired a private investigator who had been following me for months, documenting my daily routines and looking for any behavior they could characterize as problematic. According to their report, I was socially isolated because I didn't attend community events, overly protective because I carefully monitored Tommy's activities, and financially struggling because I shopped at discount stores and drove an older car. Reading their petition, I realized that Patricia had been planning this second attack for months. Every interaction we'd had, every supervised visit, had been an opportunity for her to gather ammunition to use against me. But what shocked me most was the final paragraph of their petition. They were requesting that if the court awarded them custody, I should be granted only supervised visitation rights, the same arrangement they had been forced to accept. The irony was obvious. But the threat was real. If Patricia's new legal team could convince a judge that I was an unfit mother, I could lose Tommy completely. Michael was furious when he read their new petition. This is a fishing expedition, he said angrily. They're taking normal behaviors, grieving, budgeting carefully, being protective of your child, and trying to twist them into evidence of unfitness. Can they win? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Not if I have anything to say about it, Michael replied grimly. But Jennifer, I need you to be prepared for this to get very ugly. They're going to attack every aspect of your life, your character, and your parenting. Are you ready for that? I looked at a photo of Tommy on Michael's desk, a picture David had taken of us at the park just weeks before his death. Tommy was laughing, his arms wrapped around my neck, pure joy radiating from his face. "I'm ready," I said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son." The second custody hearing was scheduled for 8 weeks later, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Those 8 weeks were the most stressful of my life. Patricia's legal team subpoenaed my medical records, my employment files, my financial statements, and even my college transcripts. They interviewed everyone I had ever worked with, every neighbor I had ever spoken to, and every service provider who had ever been to my house. They were looking for any piece of evidence they could use to paint me as an unfit mother, and their investigation was incredibly thorough. Meanwhile, Michael and I prepared our defense. We gathered testimonials from Tommy's teachers, his pediatrician, our neighbors, and my colleagues. We documented every instance of Patricia's inappropriate behavior and collected evidence of Tommy's healthy development under my care. We also discovered something interesting about Patricia's motivations. Through our own investigation, we learned that she had been telling her social circle that she was rescuing Tommy from an unsuitable mother and that she would be raising him as her own son. According to several sources, Patricia had been planning elaborate educational and social programs for Tommy, including enrollment in exclusive private schools and membership in elite social organizations. She had apparently been presenting herself as Tommy's primary guardian to her friends, despite the legal reality. "She's been living in a fantasy where she's already won custody," Michael observed. "This isn't just about Tommy's welfare, it's about her social status and her need to control the situation." But the most damaging evidence we found was a recorded conversation between Patricia and one of her friends, obtained legally through a source who was concerned about her behavior. In the recording, Patricia said, "That girl never belonged in our family anyway. David made a mistake marrying her, and now I have the chance to correct it. Tommy is a Williams, and he belongs with his real family. I don't care what it costs. I'm going to get that child away from her." The recording made it clear that Patricia's custody challenge wasn't about Tommy's best interests. It was about her desire to control and exclude me from his life. As the hearing date approached, I received an unexpected phone call from Robert Williams. David's father had been largely silent throughout the custody battles, letting Patricia take the lead in their legal strategy. "Jennifer," he said when I answered the phone, "I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I'd like to discuss the situation privately." 2 days before the custody hearing, Michael and I received another surprise. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, the psychologist Patricia had tried to bring to our supervised visit, contacted us with information she felt we needed to know. "Mrs. Martinez," she said during our phone conversation, "I want you to know that Mrs. Williams contacted me under false pretenses. She told me that you had requested an evaluation of Tommy and that you were concerned about his psychological welfare." "That's not true," I said immediately. "I know that now," Dr. Blackwood replied. "When you refused to allow the evaluation, I realized that Mrs. Williams had lied to me about your involvement. I've since learned more about the custody situation, and I'm concerned about Mrs. Williams's behavior." She paused before continuing. "Mrs. Martinez, based on my interaction with Mrs. Williams and what I observed during that brief meeting, I believe she may be engaging in what we call grandparent alienation syndrome, an unhealthy obsession with gaining control over a grandchild that can be harmful to the child's emotional development." "Would you be willing to testify about your concerns?" Michael asked. "Yes," Dr. Blackwood said firmly. "I believe the court should be aware of the potential psychological harm that could result from awarding custody to someone who is more interested in control than in the child's actual welfare." The custody hearing began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. The courthouse was packed with spectators, as news of the Williams family custody battle had spread throughout our small town. Patricia arrived with her legal team, dressed impeccably and projecting confidence. But I noticed that Robert was not with her, which seemed to surprise and anger her. Judge Martinez called the hearing to order and reviewed the case background. "This is a renewed petition for custody," she announced, "filed by Patricia Williams seeking custody of her grandson, Thomas Williams Martinez. Patricia's new lawyer, Harrison Burke, was even more aggressive than Crawford had been. He presented a case that painted me as an unstable, isolated young woman who was incapable of providing Tommy with the advantages he deserved. Your Honor, Burke argued, my client is not seeking to punish Mrs. Martinez, but rather to provide Thomas with the stability, resources, and family connections that will serve him best throughout his life. He presented their evidence of my supposed unfitness, the photographs of me crying, reports of my social isolation, and character witnesses who testified about my emotional fragility following David's death. But when Michael stood to present our defense, he systematically destroyed every argument they had made. Your Honor, Michael began, the petitioner's case is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what constitutes good parenting. They have presented normal grief responses, responsible financial management, and protective parenting as evidence of unfitness. He called Tommy's pediatrician, who testified that Tommy was thriving under my care and showed no signs of emotional distress or neglect. He called my supervisor from the hospital, who testified about my professional competence and emotional stability, even during the most difficult period of my grief. He called our neighbors, who testified about my dedication to Tommy and the loving home environment I had created for him. But the most powerful testimony came from Robert Williams himself. When Michael called Robert to the stand, Patricia's face went completely white. Her own husband was about to testify against her custody petition. Mr. Williams, Michael began, do you support your wife's petition for custody of your grandson? No, Robert said clearly. I do not. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of surprise. Why not? Michael asked. Robert looked directly at Patricia before answering. Because this custody challenge is not about Tommy's welfare, it's about my wife's need to control his life and exclude his mother from it. Tommy belongs with Jennifer, and my son David made that clear in his will and trust documents. Have you observed Mrs. Martinez's parenting of Tommy? Yes, Robert replied. She is an excellent mother. Tommy is happy, healthy, and loved. There is no legitimate reason to remove him from her care. Patricia's lawyer tried to discredit Robert's testimony during cross-examination, but the damage was done. Tommy's own grandfather had testified that his mother should retain custody. But Michael wasn't finished. He called Dr. Blackwood to the stand, and her testimony was devastating to Patricia's case. Doctor, Michael asked, based on your professional experience, what is your assessment of Mrs. Williams's motivations in seeking custody? In my professional opinion, Dr. Blackwood replied, Mrs. Williams appears to be suffering from what we call grandparent alienation syndrome. She has an unhealthy obsession with controlling her grandson's life and seems to view his mother as an obstacle to be removed rather than a parent to be respected. What would be the psychological impact on Tommy if he were removed from his mother's care? Removing a child from his primary attachment figure, especially during a period when he's already dealing with the loss of his father, could cause severe emotional trauma and long-term psychological damage. Patricia's lawyer objected repeatedly during Dr. Blackwood's testimony, but Judge Martinez allowed most of it to stand. The final piece of evidence Michael presented was the recording of Patricia's conversation with her friend, in which she had stated her intention to get that child away from her, and her belief that I had never belonged in our family. When the recording was played in court, Patricia's carefully composed facade finally cracked. She started crying, not from sadness but from rage and humiliation. Judge Martinez recessed the hearing for 30 minutes to review all the evidence presented by both sides. When court reconvened, her ruling was swift and decisive. Having reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented, she began, this court finds that the petition for custody change is without merit and is hereby denied. She paused, looking directly at Patricia. Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by the evidence of harassment and manipulation presented today. Mrs. Williams's behavior toward Mrs. Martinez has been inappropriate and potentially harmful to the child's welfare. Judge Martinez's voice became stern. Mrs. Williams, your recorded statements make it clear that your motivations in seeking custody are not based on your grandson's best interests, but rather on your desire to control his life and exclude his mother from it. She continued, the evidence shows that Thomas is thriving in his mother's care, that Mrs. Martinez is a competent and loving parent, and that there is no legitimate reason to disrupt their family unit. Therefore, Judge Martinez concluded, Not only is the custody petition denied, but Mrs. Williams's visitation rights are hereby suspended pending a psychological evaluation and completion of a co-parenting education program. The gavel came down with finality. Patricia had not only lost her custody challenge, she had lost her right to see Tommy at all until she could prove she was capable of respecting my role as his mother. As we left the courthouse, Patricia tried to approach me one last time. "Jennifer," she called out, her voice desperate, "please don't do this. He's my grandson. I love him." I turned to face her, and for the first time in our relationship, I felt no anger or fear, only sadness for a woman who had destroyed her own relationship with her grandson through her need to control and exclude. "Patricia," I said quietly, "Tommy is your grandson, and I never wanted to keep him from you. But you made it clear that you couldn't accept me as his mother. You can't love him and hate me. We're a package deal." "What do I have to do?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "You have to accept that I am Tommy's mother," I replied. "You have to stop trying to undermine me and start respecting my decisions about his care. And you have to understand that your role in his life is as his grandmother, not as his parent." 6 months later, Patricia completed her court-ordered psychological evaluation and co-parenting education program. The evaluation confirmed Dr. Blackwood's assessment. Patricia had indeed been suffering from an unhealthy need to control Tommy's life and had been unable to accept appropriate boundaries. But the counseling had helped her understand the damage her behavior had caused and the importance of respecting my role as Tommy's mother. When she petitioned the court for restored visitation rights, she included a letter of apology to me and a commitment to following all court guidelines for appropriate grandparent behavior. Judge Martinez granted her supervised visitation rights with the understanding that any violation of the boundaries would result in permanent termination of her access to Tommy. The first visit after her suspension was awkward but civil. Patricia brought a simple toy for Tommy, not the expensive, guilt-inducing gifts she had previously used, and spent their time together playing and talking rather than trying to impress him with material things. "How was your visit with Grandma Patricia?" I asked Tommy after she left. "Good," he said simply. "She didn't tell me I should live with her this time." It was a small but significant change. Over the following months, Patricia's behavior gradually improved. She began treating me with grudging respect, following the court's guidelines and focusing on building a healthy grandparent relationship with Tommy, rather than trying to replace me as his primary parent. Robert, meanwhile, had emerged as an unexpected ally. He made a point of supporting my decisions about Tommy's care and often served as a buffer between Patricia and me during family interactions. "I'm proud of how you handled this situation," he told me during one visit. "David would be proud too. You showed incredible strength and grace under pressure." The custody battle had taken nearly 2 years of my life and cost both families thousands of dollars in legal fees. But in the end, it had established clear boundaries and forced Patricia to confront her own behavior. More importantly, it had proven that the bond between a mother and child is not something that can be broken by money, influence, or social pressure. Tommy, now 5 years old, had emerged from the experience with a secure attachment to me and an understanding that while his family situation was complicated, he was loved and protected. He still asked about his daddy sometimes, and I always told him the truth, that Daddy loved him very much and had made sure we would be taken care of even after he was gone. On the 3rd anniversary of David's death, Tommy and I visited his grave together. Tommy placed a drawing he had made on the headstone, a picture of our family, with David watching over us from a cloud. "Do you think Daddy knows we're okay?" Tommy asked. "I think he does," I replied, holding my son close. "I think he's very proud of how brave and strong you've been." As we walked back to our car, I thought about everything we had been through, the grief, the legal battles, the attempts to tear our family apart, and the ultimate victory of love over manipulation. David had been right in his letter to me. I was stronger than I knew, and Tommy was exactly where he belonged with his mother, in the home we had built together, surrounded by people who loved him for who he was rather than what he represented. The Williams family still played a role in Tommy's life, but it was the appropriate role of extended family rather than primary caregivers. Patricia had learned to respect boundaries, and Robert had found his voice as an advocate for what was right rather than what was easy. But most importantly, Tommy was growing up knowing that his mother had fought for him, that his father had protected him even in death. and that family is defined by love and commitment rather than money and social status. Today, as I watch my son play in our backyard, the same backyard Patricia once dismissed as adequate, I'm grateful for every difficult moment we endured. Those challenges taught me that I was capable of protecting my family against any threat, and they taught Tommy that he is worth fighting for. If you've ever faced a custody battle with grandparents or in-laws who tried to undermine your authority as a parent, I want you to know that you are not alone. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that their money or status makes them better equipped to raise your children than you are. The bond between a parent and child is sacred, and it cannot be broken by legal challenges or family pressure. Fight for your children with everything you have because they are worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and protecting the people you love most. Share your own experiences in the comments. I read every single one, and your strength inspires me every day. Remember, you are your child's best advocate, and no one loves them the way you do. Trust that love and don't let anyone convince you it's not enough.